Geel, Belgium, September 9, 1944. Lieutenant Stuart Hills feels the metallic clang through his Sherman's hull before he sees the flash. 200 yards ahead, Captain Jimmy McWilliams' tank erupts, a fierce jet of flame punching through the turret like a blowtorch. The hull glows orange. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Nobody gets out. Hill's own tank shudders. Crack. A Panzerfaust rocket strikes his glacis. He guns the engine backward, knowing he has maybe 3 seconds before his ammunition cooks off. His mind floods with one thought: I'm next. Hills survives Geel. McWilliam doesn't. His driver is pulled from the wreckage, dead. McWilliam himself lives, but barely. Burns cover most of his body. He'll spend months in hospitals, skin grafts, morphine dreams. The Panzerfaust that hit Hill's tank knocked a chunk of armor loose but didn't penetrate. Pure luck. The next crew might not be so fortunate. And there would be a next crew. And another. And another. This wasn't Geel's tragedy alone. Across France, Belgium, and Germany, American Sherman tanks were burning. Not occasionally. Not sometimes. Systematically. When a Sherman was penetrated by German fire somewhere between 60 and 80% of the time, 6, 7, 8 tanks out of every 10 hit, the vehicle transformed into a crematorium within seconds. British tank crews watching their American counterparts called it the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter company whose advertising slogan promised it lights first time every time. Polish tankers serving with British forces had a darker name: the Burning Grave. The statistics tell a story written in burned steel and charred flesh. 4,295 Sherman tanks destroyed on the Western Front alone. When one burned after penetration, crew casualties averaged 1.28 men per tank killed or wounded. When it didn't burn, casualties dropped to 0.78 per tank. The difference between fire and survival was nearly a 40% reduction in casualties, but 6 to 8 tanks out of 10 were burning. Some units paid more than others. Time 0.5s, the 70th Tank Battalion deployed 725 men to Europe. By war's end, 166 were killed or missing in action, a death rate of 22.9%, the highest of any American tank unit in the war. The 761st Tank Battalion, composed entirely of African-American soldiers fighting to prove their worth in a segregated army, lost 24 men killed in November 1944 alone, 34 tanks knocked out or damaged in a single month. Crichton Abrams, a lieutenant colonel commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, lost 6 personal tanks. He numbered them: Thunderbolt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each one shot out from under him as he led from the front. Each time he climbed into a new tank and kept fighting. Then came December 16, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last desperate gamble, 3 German armies smashing through the Ardennes forest, trying to split Allied forces and capture the port of Antwerp. Snow. Ice. Fog so thick you couldn't see 50 yards. German Tigers and Panthers emerging from the white like metal ghosts, their 75mm and 88mm guns punching through Sherman armor at ranges where American tankers couldn't even identify what was shooting at them. In 6 weeks of fighting, American forces lost approximately 800 tanks. The casualty figures for the entire battle read like an industrial accident report. 81,000 American casualties total, 8,407 killed, 46,170 wounded, 20,905 missing. Inside those burning tanks were the 1,581 tankers killed in action across the entire European theater. Thousands more wounded, many with burns covering 60, 70, 80% of their bodies. Burns that turned young men into medical experiments, guinea pigs for new skin graft techniques, morphine addicts with faces that looked like melted wax. The economic cost was staggering but calculable. Each M4 Sherman cost $44,000 in 1945 dollars to produce. Multiply that by 4,295 destroyed tanks, and you get 189 million in hardware losses, enough money to build 4,000 B-17 bombers. But the real cost was irreplaceable. Combat-experienced crews took 6 to 12 months to train. Every burning tank didn't just destroy 5 men, it erased 5 soldiers who knew how to fight, how to survive, how to coordinate fire and movement, how to read terrain and anticipate ambushes. Skills you couldn't teach in a classroom. Knowledge written in scar tissue and close calls. Tank battalions were being pulled off the front line just to absorb replacements and integrate them into surviving crews. The 70th Tank Battalion replaced 96% of its original personnel during the war, a complete transfusion of men and experience, over and over, because the burn rate kept consuming crews faster than training camps could produce them. By late January 1945, as Patton's Third Army regrouped from the Bulge and prepared for the final push into Germany, the mathematics became inescapable. At current loss rates, the armored spearheads wouldn't reach Berlin. They'd be ground down to nothing somewhere between the Rhine and the Elbe, burned out and used up, leaving infantry to finish a tank war on foot. Something fundamental had to change. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any range. The Sherman's 51mm glasses couldn't stop a Panther's 75mm gun at 2,000 yards. American tankers were being asked to fight a duel where the enemy could kill them from distances so great they appeared as dots through periscopes, while American guns were useless until they closed to ranges where German machine guns could kill them through their vision ports. The solution wouldn't come from Detroit assembly lines cranking out improved models. It wouldn't come from Pentagon planning offices drafting new doctrine. It would come from men standing in Belgian factory yards with welding torches, staring at destroyed German Panthers, and realizing that the enemy's dead tanks held the key to keeping America's living tankers alive. But first, everyone had to understand why Shermans were burning. The Sherman tank's death sentence was written in millimeters and angles, numbers that looked perfectly reasonable on engineering blueprints but proved fatal on Belgian roads. The American M4 Sherman carried 51mm of frontal armor, sloped at 56 degrees on early models. Run the trigonometry, and that slope turned 51mm of physical thickness into approximately 76mm of effective protection. In 1941, when the Sherman was designed, this seemed adequate. German Panzer IIIs couldn't punch through it. Early Panzer IVs bounced rounds off at combat ranges. But by 1944, the Wehrmacht had evolved. The German Panther's 75mm gun fired armor-piercing rounds at 935 meters per second, nearly 3 times the speed of sound. At 1,000 yards, it could penetrate 132mm of armor. The Sherman's 51mm glasses, the Panther could defeat it at ranges exceeding 1,500 to 2,000 yards, distances where American tankers couldn't even identify targets through their periscopes. The Sherman's 75mm gun, by contrast, fired at 619 meters per second. Against a Panther's 80mm frontal armor, it was essentially worthless. Testing showed American 75mm rounds could barely scratch Panther armor even at point-blank range. The tactical mathematics was brutal. Panthers could kill Shermans at 2,000 yards. Shermans couldn't kill Panthers at 200 yards. American doctrine adapted grimly. 5 Sherman tanks had to swarm a single Panther, hitting its vulnerable side armor while 4 inevitably died. The U.S. could produce 5 Shermans for every Panther, so the math worked strategically. Cold comfort to the 20 men who'd burn alive achieving that single kill. But armor penetration wasn't even the real killer. The real killer was physics most Americans didn't understand. When a high-velocity shell penetrated a Sherman's hull, it exploded into thousands of white-hot fragments. These fragments ricocheted through the crew compartment like supersonic shrapnel, tearing through flesh and bone. But worse than the fragments was what they hit. Sherman designers had stored ammunition in sponson racks above the tracks, the most spacious location inside the cramped hull. Each main gun round consisted of brass, steel, and cloth bags of powder propellant. When white-hot fragments hit those powder bags, ignition was instantaneous. Within 2 to 3 seconds, flames engulfed the interior. The crew compartment became a blast furnace. Men had 3 choices: burn alive, suffocate, or bail out through hatches that had to be manually cranked open while fire consumed them. The Army issued CO2 fire extinguishers inside every Sherman. They were completely useless. British researchers found that 90% of fighting compartment penetrations caused fires when the tank carried full ammunition. Here's what made the problem counterintuitive. Everyone assumed the fires came from gasoline. Sherman tanks ran on high-octane aviation fuel, volatile, flammable. Surely that was burning tankers alive. No. The fuel tanks, located low in the hull with flame-suppressing systems, rarely ignited first. It was the ammunition, solid brass and steel that should have been safe, that became distributed incendiary devices. The loose powder propellant turned each rack into a bomb waiting for ignition. There was a second invisible killer, spalling. Even when German shells didn't fully penetrate, the kinetic impact sent shockwaves through the steel plate. The interior surface fractured under stress, sending razor-sharp fragments of the tank's own armor flying through the crew compartment. Men died from non-penetrating hits, killed by their own tank breaking apart from inside. The instinct trap was simple: add more armor. But where? Ordnance Department engineers calculated that significantly thickening frontal armor would push the Sherman past 35 tons, overstressing transmissions and suspensions designed for 30-ton loads. Adding side armor made the vehicle too wide for ship and rail transport. Every engineering solution created cascade failures in logistics. So Army doctrine took a different path. Tank destroyers will handle enemy armor, Shermans will support infantry. The entire institutional structure was built on this assumption. Tank Destroyer Command had faster vehicles with bigger guns, specifically designed to hunt enemy tanks. Shermans weren't supposed to fight Panthers. In practice, German tanks didn't wait for American tank destroyers to arrive. They engaged whatever targets appeared, and Shermans were everywhere. Tank Destroyer doctrine, brilliant in staff colleges, collapsed on contact with reality. The psychological barrier reinforced the engineering trap. Senior commanders insisted tank versus tank combat wasn't the Sherman's primary mission. When frontline crews from Italy requested 76mm gun upgrades in 1943, guns that could at least contest Panthers, the requests languished for 18 months. Time 0.5s. When crews reported catastrophic burn rates, rear echelon officers dismissed it as frontline hysteria. Statistics showed overall armored force casualties at 13.7%, far lower than infantry's 87%. Clearly, tanks were safe. This ignored a crucial detail. Those figures included all armored personnel, mechanics in rear depots, supply troops, headquarters staff. For actual tank crews engaging enemy armor, death rates approached infantry levels. Statistical averaging made the horror invisible to planners. Multiple solutions failed or arrived too late. Factory-installed applique armor, thin 1-inch plates over ammunition bins, proved ineffective against high-velocity guns. Wet stowage systems, where ammunition was surrounded by liquid-filled jackets that suppressed fires, took 11 months to deploy after being identified as a solution in February 1943. The 76mm gun variant didn't reach Europe in significant numbers until August 1944, 18 months after crews first requested it. By then, thousands had died fighting with inadequate guns. The invisible enemy wasn't German engineering superiority. It was counterintuitive physics combined with institutional momentum that prioritized production volume over crew survivability. 50,000 Shermans had been built. The industrial machine couldn't pivot without disrupting the entire war effort. So men burned while bureaucrats debated metallurgy. The answer had been there all along, scattered across Belgian fields. But it would take frontline soldiers, not engineers, to see it. The warnings came early. They came from everywhere, and they were ignored. North Africa, February 1943, Kasserine Pass. Germany's first major encounter with American armor ends with 183 of 300 U.S. tanks destroyed. Most burn completely, blackened hulls scattered across Tunisian sand. Within days, the Army Medical Research Lab begins investigating. Their report, dated February 1943, identifies the culprit: ammunition propellant, not fuel. The solution seems obvious: move ammunition to better protected positions or surround it with fire-suppressing liquid. A DuPont chemical engineer even provides specific designs for wet stowage racks. In November 1943, nothing happens. The British are more systematic. Throughout 1943 and into 1944, British No. 2 Operational Research Section conducts statistical analysis of Sherman casualties in North Africa and Italy. Their finding is damning. 82% of Shermans catch fire after an average of just 1.89 armor penetrations. The report concludes that the Sherman is dangerously vulnerable to all calibers of German anti-tank guns. British recommendations: immediate armor improvements, relocate ammunition to hull floors, prioritize the 76mm gun variant. The recommendations are filed and forgotten. June 1944. Immediately after D-Day, Canadian military researchers compile analysis of 75mm Sherman tank casualties suffered between 6th June and 10 July 1944. The document's language is unusually blunt. It confirms the most pessimistic views about the inferiority of the Sherman tank. The data is irrefutable. In Normandy's hedgerow country, where German defenders have clear sight lines, Shermans are being systematically destroyed. British crews develop escape drills targeting under 2.5 seconds, the time between penetration and ammunition fire. They carry fewer rounds than authorized, deliberately reducing combat effectiveness to improve survival odds. American command takes no action. And then there are the voices from below. Tank crews in Italy, summer 1943, formally request 76mm gun upgrades. The requests vanish up the chain of command. Crews in France, summer 1944, send after-action reports describing catastrophic vulnerability. These are filed. Lieutenant Stuart Hills and hundreds of British Sherman commanders write detailed accounts of watching American tanks burn. Polish tankers serving with British forces give the Sherman its grimmest nickname, the Burning Grave. None are listened to. Why? The answers reveal institutional failure at multiple levels. First, production momentum. By mid-1944, 49,234 M4 Shermans have been produced across dozens of factories. General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, Pacific Car and Foundry, entire supply chains optimized for current specifications. Changing the design would disrupt the industrial machine that is America's primary advantage. The Pentagon's calculation is cold but clear: we can replace tanks faster than Germany can destroy them. Individual crew survival is secondary to strategic production capacity. Second, doctrinal rigidity. General Leslie McNair and Army Ground Forces Command have committed to tank destroyers handling enemy armor. Admitting Sherman inadequacy means admitting the entire structure of American armored warfare is wrong. No senior officer wants to be the one who tells Congress that billions of dollars in procurement were based on flawed doctrine. Third, statistical misunderstanding. Overall armored force casualties appear acceptable when averaged across all personnel. Tank crews burning alive in Belgium represent a small percentage of total armored personnel when you include mechanics, supply troops, and headquarters staff who never see combat. The averaging hides the horror. Perhaps most tragically, the U.S. Army has already solved the ammunition fire problem. Wet stowage ammunition racks with propellant charges surrounded by water glycerol jackets are developed by November 1943. Testing shows they reduce fire probability from 60 to 80% to just 10 to 15%, a 75% reduction. The technology works perfectly. The first wet stowage Sherman doesn't roll off the production line until January 3, 1944, 11 months after the solution was identified. Even then, deployment prioritizes new production. Retrofitting existing tanks in Europe is considered too complex, so crews burn in tanks that could have been saved with modifications requiring 85 man-hours of labor per vehicle. By February 1945, after the Battle of the Bulge, Third Army ordnance officers scramble for solutions. They pull the old British reports. One can imagine their reaction reading casualty statistics from 18 months earlier. They knew. The British told us. The medical research lab told us. The crews told us. We had the data. We had the solution. The forgotten prophets weren't crackpots or alarmists. They were the official research apparatus of two armies. Their sin was telling uncomfortable truths to institutions that prized production volume over individual survival. The question haunting every burned Sherman from Normandy to the Rhine: how many men died because the truth arrived 11 months, 18 months, 2 years too late? The solution, when it finally came, wouldn't come from the people who'd ignored the warnings. It would come from men standing in mud, staring at wrecked tanks, and asking a question engineers never thought to ask: why are we throwing this away? The solution didn't come from Aberdeen Proving Ground or the Detroit Tank Arsenal. It came from men standing in mud, staring at destroyed tanks, and asking a simple question: why are we throwing this away? Summer 1944, Normandy. Unnamed tank crews, sergeants, corporals, privates who'd never seen an engineering textbook, begin improvising. They fill sandbags with earth and lash them to their Shermans' front hulls. They pour concrete mixed with wire mesh over vulnerable spots. They weld spare track links into makeshift grills. None of it is authorized. Most of it violates technical specifications. All of it is driven by the primal urge to not burn alive. The modifications spread through frontline units like wildfire. Crews trade techniques. A battalion in the Bocage country discovers that concrete reinforced with steel rods provides better protection than sandbags. An armored division near Caen finds that welding additional track links over the glacis deflects some rounds. The innovations are crude, ugly, and completely outside official channels. General George S. Patton, commanding Third Army, sees the sandbag modifications and explodes. He issues explicit orders: no sandbags. His reasoning is mechanically sound. Sandbags add up to 3 tons of dead weight, stressing transmissions and suspensions designed for 30-ton vehicles. Testing shows sandbags have limited effectiveness against high-velocity, armor-piercing rounds. The sand simply compresses and lets shells pass through. Ordnance Department observers file dismissive reports. The psychological value of the sandbags is the greatest value actually derived. Translation: they don't work, but if they make crews feel better, whatever. Patton bans them anyway. Across Third Army, crews are ordered to remove sandbag modifications. Most comply. Time 0.5s. Some don't. The debate becomes heated. Are modifications worth the mechanical risk? Then comes the Battle of the Bulge. December 16, 1944 through January 25, 1945. 6 weeks of the most intense armored combat the Western Front has seen. 800 American tanks destroyed. Third Army loses dozens of Shermans in bitter winter fighting around Bastogne. When the smoke clears and units regroup, the casualty statistics are undeniable. Something has to change. Late January 1945, Belgium. The Ardennes forest is littered with destroyed tanks. American Shermans burned out and abandoned. German Panthers, their turrets blown off by ammunition explosions, their hulls intact. And there, walking among the wrecks, an unknown American soldier, maybe a tanker, maybe an ordnance sergeant. makes the connection that changes everything. The German Panthers have armor plates, thick armor plates, 80 mm glacis plates sloped at 55 degrees, made from superior German steel with excellent face-hardening properties, just lying there, unguarded, free. Why not cut them off and weld them to our tanks? The insight seems obvious in retrospect, but it required separating what crews had been doing, adding sandbags, concrete, scrap metal from why they were doing it, adding protection. Sandbags failed because earth can't stop steel. Concrete failed because it was too heavy and cracked under impact. But salvaged armor plates, that's just relocating existing protection. The material is proven, it protected Panthers. The weight is manageable, 1 Panther glacis can armor 2 Shermans, and critically, it's free. Battlefield recovery, not factory production. The first experiments are crude. Ordnance units with portable welding equipment cut plates with acetylene torches and tack weld them onto hulls. The welds are ugly, the fits imperfect, the results visually chaotic, mismatched armor in different colors, uneven surfaces, asymmetric protection, but the principle is sound. February 1945. A Sherman from the 6th Armored Division, freshly modified with a welded Panther glacis plate, encounters a German armored vehicle. The German fires first, a 75 mm round at medium range, the kind of hit that routinely penetrates standard Shermans. The American crew braces for white-hot fragments, the 3-second countdown to fire. Instead, a tremendous clang. The Panther plate, welded to the Sherman's glacis with a 6-inch gap, absorbs the impact. The plate itself is knocked partially loose, hanging at an angle. But underneath, the Sherman's original armor remains intact. Zero penetration. The crew is unhurt. Word spreads through Third Army like electricity. That tank got hit and didn't burn. The modification worked. Tank crews start requesting modifications. Battalion commanders want their entire units upgraded. By mid-February, the demand becomes impossible to ignore. Third Army Ordnance officers approach General Patton, the same general who banned sandbags just months before. They present the data, salvaged armor plates properly welded, provide significant protection. Each modification requires 85 man-hours. Weight penalty, 500 to 1,500 pounds, manageable with track extensions. And critically, the armor is salvaged, essentially free. Patton reverses himself completely. The difference he recognizes is engineering. Welded steel plate isn't sandbags. The math works. He gives the order, all M4A3 76mm tanks in Third Army will receive additional frontal armor. Make it happen. But Third Army Ordnance faces a problem: capacity. They have portable welding equipment, but modifying hundreds of tanks would take months with field units alone. Then someone makes the second breakthrough observation: Belgian civilian factories. The town of Bastogne, recently liberated, sits in Belgium's industrial region. 3 factories near the city have metalworking equipment, skilled welders, and nothing to weld. Their German occupation contracts are void. Third Army Ordnance officers contract the factories for American military work. By late February, the system is operating at scale. Salvage crews comb Ardennes battlefields, identifying destroyed tanks with recoverable armor. Cutting crews with acetylene torches remove intact plates, prioritizing Panther glacis for superior quality. Trucks haul salvaged armor to Belgian factories. Sherman tanks, pulled from frontline units in rotation, arrive for modification. Belgian civilian welders, working around the clock, perform installations, 20 hours for plate preparation, 45 hours for welding continuous beads to prevent separation under impact, 20 hours for finishing work. The program focuses on 3 armored divisions, the 4th, 6th, and 11th. Each operates approximately 168 Shermans. The goal is roughly 36 tanks per division, command tanks and lead platoon vehicles most likely to encounter heavy resistance. Total, about 108 tanks, 85 man-hours each, 9,180 man-hours of welding labor. Spread across 3 factories working in parallel, timeline 4 to 6 weeks. The modifications become technically successful and, crucially, popular. Tankers who receive modified Shermans refuse to give them up. When units rotate to rear areas, crews insist their up-armored tanks come with them rather than accepting standard replacements. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, chooses an up-armored M4A3E8 as his personal tank. He names it Thunderbolt 7th, the 7th tank to carry that name. After losing Thunderbolt's swine through 6 inks in combat, Abrams is one of Patton's most respected armor commanders. Patton reportedly said Abrams was the best tank commander he'd ever seen. When Abrams leads from the front in a modified Sherman, other commanders notice. The solution was absurdly simple: use the enemy's superior armor against them. But it required 3 elements bureaucratic systems struggle to provide: recognition of field expertise over engineering theory, willingness to abandon failed doctrine, and creative use of available resources. No R&D required, no factory retooling, just welders, torches, and men willing to repurpose the dead to save the living. The Third Army Armor Modification Program transformed from field expedient to industrial operation in less than 6 weeks, a speed that only wartime urgency and Belgian welders could produce. By March 1945, 3 factories near Bastogne operated 24-hour shifts. The process became standardized through obsessive attention to detail. Salvage crews identified donor tanks, prioritizing Panthers for superior armor quality and Shermans for component compatibility. Cutting crews with acetylene torches removed intact plates, grinding edges smooth. Transport units hauled materials through Belgian winter to factory floors. Welders executed installations using continuous bead welding to prevent plate detachment under combat impact. Each Sherman required exactly 85 man-hours, 20 hours for plate preparation, 45 for welding, 20 for finishing work and weight distribution testing. The program required no formal training manual because the skills already existed. U.S. Army Ordnance battalions included welders as standard personnel, men who'd been repairing battlefield damage since North Africa. Belgian factory workers brought decades of metalworking expertise. The training consisted of ordnance officers providing specifications where to place plates, prioritize glacis, then turret front, how to space them, 0 to 6 inches gap for spaced armor effect, how to weld continuously without gaps. Tank crews needed familiarization with their modified vehicles, heavier steering, slightly different acceleration, but the changes were intuitive. The technology evolved rapidly through field feedback. Early modifications used simple tack welds until crews reported plates occasionally loosening from combat stress. Ordnance teams mandated continuous welding along entire edges. Some crews experimented with angling additional armor at steeper slopes. Ordnance teams measured optimal angles and standardized the practice. But the most critical technological integration came from parallel innovation. Extended end connectors, nicknamed duckbills, widened Sherman tracks from 16.5 to 21 inches. First Army alone received 1.3 million duckbill connectors by April 1945. These compensated perfectly for additional armor weight, reducing ground pressure and improving mobility on soft Belgian terrain. The combination, better armor and better traction, actually enhanced tactical performance. Tanks didn't become sluggish, they became more capable. The measurable success came immediately. Modified tanks participated in Third Army's rapid advance across Germany from March through May 1945. Creighton Abrams' Thunderbolt 7th led multiple spearhead attacks, taking hits that would have destroyed standard Shermans. While specific casualty statistics for modified versus unmodified tanks weren't separately tracked in official records. Qualitative reports were unanimous. Crews with applique armor reported higher survival rates when engaged by German armor. Third Army's maintenance battalions noted another crucial metric: recovery rates. Tanks that didn't burn after penetration could be recovered and repaired. Throughout the European campaign, Third Army recovered and returned to service 67% of knocked-out Shermans. Modified armor, by preventing catastrophic fires, meant more damaged tanks became repairable vehicles rather than total losses. A tank that didn't burn could be towed to maintenance, patched, and returned to combat. A tank that burned was scrap metal. The economics were brutal and clear. The program's true validation came from crew behavior. When units rotated to rear areas for refitting, tankers with modified Shermans refused standard replacement vehicles. They wanted their tanks, the ones with welded Panther plates, the visible scars of Belgian factory work. Ordnance officers reported the program was both technically successful and very popular with the tank crews blessed with the applique armor. Crews who'd lived with these modifications refused to go back to unarmored Shermans. That's not just preference. That's survival instinct validated. But the war ended before the innovation could spread beyond Third Army. First Army observed Third Army's success, but focused on wet stowage retrofits and 76mm gun upgrades as parallel solutions. Seventh Army supplied salvaged tank hulls to Third Army, but didn't implement comprehensive modifications for its own units. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered, only approximately 100 to 120 American tanks had received systematic field armor modifications. The scale remained limited by the war's timeline, not by the concept's validity. The modern legacy, however, is vast because the principle of applique armor proved universal. It works, it saves lives, and it evolved into technologies that define contemporary armored vehicle design. Post-war, the concept became doctrine. The M1 Abrams tank, named after Creighton Abrams in 1980, uses modular composite armor panels that can be removed and replaced based on threat environment. Want maximum protection for desert operations? Add reactive armor blocks. Urban combat? Install Tusk, Tank Urban Survival Kit. Packages with bolt-on reactive armor tiles. The principle is identical to 1945 Belgium: adapt protection to mission rather than building one-size-fits-all vehicles. Abrams armor kits can be installed in 48 hours. Belgian welders took 85 man-hours. Technology improved. Principle remained unchanged. Israel provided the most direct lineage. In the 1950s to 60s, Israel acquired surplus Sherman tanks and extensively modified them, installing French 75mm and 105mm guns, modern engines, and, crucially, salvaged armor from knocked-out Panther and Panzer IV tanks captured in 1948. These Super Shermans, M50 and M51 variants, fought in the 1967 Six-Day War and successfully engaged Soviet-supplied T-54 and T-55 tanks. Superior enemy armor defeated by superior Israeli adaptive doctrine. Israeli doctrine explicitly embraced the WW2 lesson: use available resources creatively rather than waiting for perfect factory solutions. Modern conflicts demonstrate the principle's enduring relevance. In Iraq and Afghanistan, 2003 to 2011, U.S. soldiers added hillbilly armor to unarmored Humvees, welded steel plates, sandbags, plywood. The parallel to 1944 was exact: troops improvising protection with available materials because official procurement couldn't match battlefield reality. This grassroots innovation led directly to the MRAP, mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle program, and factory-produced armor kits. Once again, soldiers showed institutional procurement what was needed. Once again, the answer came from the front lines, not planning offices. The Ukraine conflict, 2022 to present, features widespread applique armor, cage armor designed to defeat shape-charge warheads, and reactive armor blocks on both Russian and Ukrainian vehicles, battlefield salvage and component repurposing remain standard practice. Tank crews still weld things to their vehicles when official protection seems insufficient. The fundamental physics haven't changed. Spaced armor disrupts penetrating jets, additional thickness improves protection, and troops closest to danger best understand what defenses they need. It's 1945 all over again, except now with anti-tank missiles instead of Panzerfausts. Commercial applications include civilian armored vehicles for executive protection and cash transport. These use bolt-on armor panels, ceramic and composite materials now, not steel plate, but the modular principle remains. Vehicles can be customized from basic protection to maximum threat configurations without redesigning the entire platform. The principle Abrams and his crew validated under fire is now embedded in commercial security products. The universal lesson transcends armor: empower people closest to problems to solve them. Institutional systems optimize for different metrics than frontline survival. Production volume, regulatory compliance, procurement procedures, these matter, but they're secondary to keeping people alive. The Sherman armor story teaches that breakthrough innovations often come from combining existing resources in new ways rather than inventing entirely new technologies. Salvaged Panther plates and welding torches weren't new. The insight was recognizing that battlefield scrap was superior to factory supplies and having authority structures willing to listen. Creighton Abrams' fate provides the poetic coda to this story. He survives the war, rises through Army ranks, commands U.S. forces in Vietnam, 1968 to 1972, and becomes Army Chief of Staff, 1972 to 1974. In 1980, the Army names its next-generation main battle tank after him, not for strategic brilliance or political connections, but because of what he represented as a tank battalion commander: leadership from the front, trust in crew expertise, and willingness to use imperfect solutions immediately rather than perfect solutions eventually. The M1 Abrams tank, with its modular armor and crew survivability focus, embodies the lessons of Thunderbolt 7. The program's forgotten heroes remain unnamed: the Belgian welders working through frozen nights, the American ordnance sergeants measuring angles and calculating weight distributions, the salvage crews cutting plates from wrecked Panthers in January snow. Their legacy lives in every modern armored vehicle with bolt-on protection. The principle they proved, that armor can adapt to threats rather than predict them, saved thousands of lives in 1945 and continues saving lives today. Sometimes survival isn't about building stronger shields from scratch. Sometimes it's about recognizing that the enemy's discarded shields work even better. Sometimes the answer is already lying in the mud. Sometimes you just need permission to pick it up and weld it on.